this is something I'm super passionate about. I was put in a position of leadership before I knew anything about it and what to do with myself, so I had to learn the hard way, hoping to spare all of you from the pain that I went through and that I put my team through. Who has seen this image before? Can you raise your hand if you've seen it? Okay, so a few people that have not. I feel like this is the best visual articulation of what I'm about to share with you. It rings so true for me. If any of you have worked with a boss like the one on the top, it probably rings pretty true for you as well. Don't be that person. Don't work for that person. Don't have anything to do with that person. Try to be the person on the bottom. So hopefully I can help you get there. So I learned the hard way. My career in digital started about 9 years ago. It was a very transitional time. Social media was exploding. There was not a single brand on Facebook at the time. There were very few brands that were on MySpace. I started working at a digital word of mouth agency, and we were on message boards. We were in chat rooms. It's crazy that this was just 9 years ago, because it seems like it was like a whole different world back then. Nobody mentioned the term social media. What was great about this was that there were a ton of opportunities to step up and get noticed. So I worked at an agency that had 3 leaders. One of them came from HBO. One of them actually came from Bill Clinton's campaign. And then one of them was a COO who had run just about every type of business that was out there. None of them knew shit about social media. They barely knew digital. So all of us kids really had a voice. And it also gave us access to these Fortune 100 clients. So I've worked with some of the best. I worked with Kraft, worked with Safeway, I've worked with Apple, worked with Diageo. I got thrown in the deep end a lot. So knowing social and being in an agency where there were few leaders that did, we would get invited to meetings with CEOs, which is crazy, because now 9 years later, it's very rare that I end up in a room with a CEO of a big company. But when I was brand new, they needed somebody who could speak the speak, so I ended up there. And because so few people back then knew social media, you were needed everywhere. So I wasn't just in strategy, I wasn't just a community manager. It was like any time you needed to talk about social media, whether it was like new biz, whether it was account management, whether it was leading a team, I had to be there. So it gave me a lot of range. My timeline, so you guys know that what I'm saying has some roots. Started out as a marketing associate in 2006. The agency that I worked for would get projects, and they would hire a bunch of kids to do the work, then they would let them go. Then they would get a new project, they'd hire a bunch of kids to do the work, and then they'd let them go. So when I started, that was my assumption of the job. It was temporary, I was pursuing other things, it wasn't that important to me. So we were doing a campaign for Aquafresh white trays, and at the time, Crest white strips were out on the market, Aquafresh white trays were not, and they hired us to go into message boards and chat rooms and try to get people to pre-order white trays. So basically, we were telling people, you have to have white teeth. Here are all the reasons why you have to have white teeth, but wait a couple months, because you really need to use our product. And what I saw was happening was people were like, okay, you convinced me I need white teeth. I'm going to go out and get Crest white strips because they're on the shelf right now. Why would I wait? So I went to my CEO at the time, because I had no fear. I was like, if he fires me, he fires me. I don't care. I don't need this job. And I said, this campaign sucks. It doesn't make any sense. Why are we doing this? I said, I bet if you looked at sales for Crest white strips, they're probably going up every time we go out there and we do our work. He goes, what do you want me to do about it? And I said, well, I think you should tell a client that we should wait until they're on the market. Like, pre-ordering doesn't make any sense. If they're concert tickets, maybe, but we're talking about white trays. So he liked that, and he promoted me to a campaign manager. It was the first time that the company had ever had a campaign manager, but it was also the first time that somebody that was doing the work had ever gone to the CEO and told him how it was going. Okay? So at the time, they're getting these campaigns, they're doing them, then they're like letting everybody go, then they have to sell something else, and he was like, well, hold on, now somebody's giving me some intel here, maybe we can do a better job for our clients, and maybe we can keep them around. So I was a campaign manager. The first campaign that I managed was for MLB 07 The Show. It was a video game, and historically, this company had done the campaigns for the PlayStation version of it, but not the PSP version of it, which is like the handheld. So while I was managing the campaign, I was sharing a lot of like what we were learning with the CEO, who was then sharing it with the client. And they said, hey, this is great. For the first time, we're going to have you guys do the campaign for the PSP as well. And so we started getting this return business because we were sharing insights, we were learning. We also were paying attention to what people were saying. It was the first time that Sony had ever been on MySpace, because we were talking to kids in message boards, gaming message boards, and they were saying, why don't you have a MySpace page? Like, we want to see videos of the gameplay, we want to see photos, we want to know all this stuff. You should set up a MySpace page. So we did. So things started going really well at this company. About a year later, we went from doing about $400,000 worth of business a year to doing about $1.5 million, $2 million. And so I got another promotion. I was a director. This timeline doesn't happen usually, and the only reason it happened for me was because social was brand new. Nobody knew how to do it. There weren't a lot of shops that were doing it, and I was at a very small one where they had a need. So I show this just because I want you guys to know, like, usually you don't learn leadership so quickly and so early on in your career and with so little experience, but I was in a really unique position where I was given the opportunity. So we got a lot of more work, and about a year later, I had a VP title. So you can imagine, as this was happening, my responsibilities were changing, and there was a lot more leadership expected of me. So when you're an associate, it's pretty easy to know what you're supposed to be doing, right? It's your personal work output. It's the quality of your work. I mean, you know in the middle of the day if you're doing a good job or not, right? You know how good your work is. When you get promoted to manager, it gets a little more difficult. So you find yourself not just responsible for yourself, but responsible for a team's output as well. So usually, when you're a manager, you don't know until the very end of the day whether or not you're doing a good job. When you get to be a leader, it's not just about work, right? So now you're responsible for the team quality, for the actual people that you're working with, for growing them, for their performance, for their happiness. I mean, there's a lot more that goes along with it. And that's where it gets really, really hard. At least it got really, really hard for me. I can tell you after almost 10 years in the agency world, I think it gets hard for a lot of people because I think we've all probably worked with more bosses than we have leaders. It's a pretty fair assumption. So yeah, it got really hard. What I found is that as my responsibility was going up, my control was going down. I'm a control freak. I didn't like that. I wanted to do the best work. I'd had such great experience up until that point. I'd gotten all these promotions. The clients were really happy, and I felt like it was because I had access to everything that was happening at all times. All of a sudden, I had more accounts and more work than I'd ever had before, and suddenly I didn't know what the hell was going on. And I had to trust my team that they were getting it done. And it's a lot easier to micromanage than it is to put your faith in your team. Again, I'm sure a lot of you have experienced at least one side of that. What I found is that, as you shift from a doer to a leader, it really requires this softer set of skills that nobody tells you about, nobody prepares you for, and it's a set of skills that you probably are not used to using in the professional context. So you can find a lot of articles out there about leadership. I'm sure there's a lot of other things that'll tell you, that it needs, but for me, this is what it's come down to. Integrity is incredibly important. When you're a leader, again, I talked about trust, right? You gotta trust your team, but your team has to trust you as well. So what I found is that the leaders that I felt most comfortable with are people that I can go to, that I feel like I trust them, I feel like they have my best interest at heart. It's somebody like my CEO who I could go to and say, this campaign is shit, it's not working, right? If I didn't trust him, I wouldn't have told him that. And because I told him that, everybody benefited. I benefited, the company benefited, the client benefited. But without that integrity and that trust, I never would have been able to speak up. Communication, this is something that I think got talked about a lot yesterday in the talks, selling your ideas, bucking the millennial stereotype. It's all about communication. I don't think there's any part of your job that's not gonna benefit from really great communication skills. Perspective. So as a leader, one of the first campaigns that we did was for Philadelphia cream cheese when I was back at that old agency. And it was the first brand at Kraft that had ever been on social media. It was a really, really big deal. They'd never given the okay for an agency to speak freely on behalf of a brand at Kraft. They'd had everything pre-approved up until then. And we told them, hey, look, if we're gonna go on Facebook, MySpace, we're gonna have to be able to talk to people. We can't have just pre-approved messaging points that we're pumping out. So it was a really big deal. And it was stressful, and I felt a lot of weight on my shoulders because I was the only leader in my agency that understood the space. And I was freaking out one day, and my CEO said to me, this isn't fucking brain surgery. We're not saving anybody. We're not saving the world. We're not saving a person. It's fucking cream cheese, Tyler. Calm down. And it gave me perspective, and thank God that he had that perspective because I've worked with people before that probably would have been like, figure it out. You got to get it done. It's got to happen. This is a big account. It was the biggest account we'd ever had at that point. And if he'd done that, I wouldn't have done a good job. I would have been scared. And instead, I felt, empowered. And it's something that I remind myself of pretty often. So if you guys ever need to use that, if you're ever scared, you're ever nervous about a project, remind yourself you're not saving the world. It's probably just as trivial as cream cheese. And then mentorship. This is really important because as you become a leader, you get less control, right? I talked about trust. You got to trust your team. You can't just trust them. You can't bring somebody in and just put them in a position of power and just hope and pray they're going to do a good job. You got to teach them how to get there. And you as a leader have access to more of what's happening in the organization than any one of your individual team members does. So take them aside, spend time with them. One of my favorite things to do is set up like a weekly one-on-one where I have a solid hour with everyone on my team. And we just talk, how's it going? Is there anything that's bothering you? Are you nervous about something? Is there something that's not working? Is there something that's working really well? Is there something that you want to work on? I talk to a lot of folks who are very nervous about getting on stage and giving presentations, and so I try to find ways to help them feel more confident about that, because you're going to have to talk to clients. So, mentorship. So why does any of this matter? And I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to go quicker. Great leadership leads to great success. I think that the story about Philadelphia cream cheese, about these accounts that we were getting suddenly going from like one-offs to return business, repeat clients, expanding within organizations. All of that came from the fact that we had a leader who was listening, who was approachable, and who trusted us. A couple of my favorite leaders. I don't think anybody can deny Richard Branson is an incredible businessman. He's an incredible leader. I think a lot of us, oh, that's not supposed to be there. I think a lot of us have a lot of passion for the Zappos brand and what they've done for their employees. The similar traits, when you look at these guys, well-respected, innovative, very passionate about their business, expansive, and it's all led to success. When you look at like Tony and what he did with Link Exchange and then transitioning into shoes. I mean, it's crazy to think that like what he was doing in the ad world would then translate into an apparel business, but it has, and it's been really successful. You think about Richard Branson being innovative and being expansive, going from Virgin Records to Virgin Mobile to Virgin Atlantic, Virgin America. I mean, it all leads to success, right? It's profitable, it's sustainable, industry changing, and I think the most important thing here is these people are happy. If you've worked with bosses, they're not happy. The reason that they're being such an asshole to you is because they're not happy. They're stressed out. If you've worked with a great leader, the reason that they can give you that empowerment that they can give you is because they're pretty solid. They're pretty confident. They know that the world's not going to end if this project doesn't go well because they have some perspective, and it really helps them to be happier people. So, what does leadership enable? Innovation. We talk a lot about that trust factor. If your team can't trust you to come to you with new ideas and know that you're not going to shoot them down, you're not going to innovate, right? If you manage people, you're going to keep doing the same shit over and over and over and over again. Innovation cannot exist without great leadership. One of the talks yesterday that Whit gave was about selling ideas, and if you're working for a boss, it's a hell of a lot harder to sell a good idea than if you're working for a leader, because the leader's looking for those ideas. Growth, longevity, passion, I think these all hopefully make sense by now. So 3 key takeaways. Give a shit, not just about the work, but about the people. I think this is the thing that I wish I had realized earlier on in my career as a VP, was I was so focused on the work that sometimes I forgot about the people that were doing it. And if you can focus instead on the people, know that they are going to be there long after that project ends. You're going to be working with those people in 2 years. You're going to forget what that thing was that you got in a fight about on that project. They're not going to forget how they felt when they talked to you about it. Choose leaders. Some of you are in positions where you're either in leadership or you're going to be in leadership very soon. Most of you at this point, though, have access to leaders. You're working side by side with them. You're engaging with them at some point. Make sure you're working for leaders and not bosses. We're sponges. We pick up what's around us. And if you're working for a boss, you're going to find yourself doing that stuff, and you don't want to be that person. So when you go for an interview, talk to the person you're going to be working for. Get a feel for how they're going to lead you. Don't put yourself in a position where you're going to work for a boss. And manage projects, not people. Deadlines, timelines, those things can all be managed. People should not be managed. If you're working with somebody that you have to manage, maybe you need to hire somebody else. I think that was one of the toughest lessons that I had to learn, was the people that really required me to be a manager weren't people that were the right fit for the job. So choose people that want to grow, they want to be better at what they're doing, and then help them get there, you know, guide them, grow them, lead them. So if you only remember 3 things, remember those 3 things.
Thank you,
Cool.
Tyler. That's great. I think we're a little bit over, so
Yeah.
I think, is it cool if you have questions for Tyler, she'll, you know,
Cool.
she'll be around, right?
All right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Thank you.